a short introduction. Jimenez Lai was born in Taiwan, grew up in Canada, and lives in Los Angeles. Before Bureau Spectacular, Lai lived in a desert shelter at Taliesin and resided in a shipping container at Atelier Van Lieshout on the piers of Rotterdam. Lai is widely exhibited and published around the world, including the MoMA-collected White Elephant. His first book, Citizens of No Place, was published by Princeton Architectural Press with a grant from the Graham Foundation. Lai's work has been collected by MoMA, SFMOMA, Art Institute of Chicago, and LACMA. Hi, welcome to Cyberia, TIFA's annual virtual conference, and hello from India. We're so glad to have you here. Can you hear me okay? Everything's fine?
Yes, I can hear you. Everything's great.
Okay. Handing it over to you whenever you're ready.
Great. Okay, great. Oh, you know what I should have done? Give me 1 second. 1 second, please.
No problem.
Does this improve my audio quality?
I'm not sure, but we can hear you clearly.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I'll just introduce myself and introduce this presentation. This presentation will be broken down into, I guess, a few parts where I'll first introduce myself and my work, after which I will present a few stories, and associated with the stories, there will be built work or images. I will end with two short, I guess, excerpts of larger things, one of which is a reflection on, our relationship with, I guess, the future of representation, the future of something that feels like video games. Finally, I will end the presentation with one additional short story. But to start, I want to say, things have really changed, right? Things have really changed over the past, I don't know, let's say 15, 20 years. Whereas when people used to talk about digital architecture, they might have been talking about certain techniques of, I don't know, fabrication, computation, and so on and so forth. But the expansive nature of the notion of architecture as a multimedia practice, I repeat that, architecture as a multimedia practice has really become, a norm, a new type of norm. And when I say this, someone like someone like, well, anyway, whereas we would have been thinking about architecture as strictly a translation of the drawing, we transition into making models, taking photos of models, or maybe making short films. I think the idea of representation has really exploded, right? But then the idea of building has also really changed. So I will just start now. So my name is Jimenez Lai. I have a small practice called Bureau Spectacular. We're in Los Angeles. Over the years, we've done quite a range of things. So it goes to saying architects, think about things from spoons to cities. I think it's a lot more than that now. This, for example, over the years we've done, this is a pavilion when we had a chance to represent Taiwan at the Venice Biennale. We designed lamps, we designed structures for, I guess, this is for the MoMA PS1. We designed, speculative power structures that think about the future of, I guess, how people organize themselves. And there's even, I guess, drawings that look like cartoons. And this is one aspect I will dwell on a little bit. The idea, I think there are maybe two major chapters to the history of Bureau Spectacular in this way. One of which I would say, it's a practice of cartoons about architecture, where cartoon is a medium and architecture is the subject matter. But then the second aspect of it, or the second chapter of it, might be cartoonish architecture, where architecture is the medium, right? So if you draw plans or sections, architecture is the medium, but then cartoons is sensibility. The cartoons about architecture, where we tell stories about architecture, or cartoonish architecture, using the graphic qualities or visual sensibilities of cartoon to design. And I think this relationship with cartoons about architecture also propelled a surprising trajectory, especially more recently. In 2020, we were approached by a, I guess, private group in downtown Los Angeles that works with the city. So it's kind of semi-public, semi-private group called BCBID, as the Business Improvement District group that represents a bunch of stakeholders in downtown, and they approached us to produce a kind of urban analysis of what downtown Los Angeles is. We told them it's going to be pretty dumb if we do it. Like we like to think about, what it means to do. I guess maybe I should have been defining the word no place. If we were to say utopia is less so of an ideal place, but a speculative platform to be thinking about no place, we're probably going to do something like that. And they said, fine, that's totally fine. In fact, that's what they're hoping we would do. And we took this opportunity to start thinking about a lot of the contemporary conditions in downtown Los Angeles. Whereas cartoons about architecture might have been simply a way of telling stories, but I think there is a very journalistic relationship with what cartoon can do. When you think about in newspapers where there would be a cartoon segment where political commentaries could be made, in the editorial segments where some politicians would have been made fun of. Here we were thinking, how do we use this opportunity presented to us, being hired to do an urban analysis to say something about contemporary issues? Last year, for instance, after the murder of George Floyd, the city changed. The city became a space of protest. But as opposed to thinking about the public spaces like Pershing Square in downtown Los Angeles, a civic infrastructure designed for such an occasion, it's not the city squares that were being used for the debates. It's the streets. People took it to the streets. Whereas once upon a time, a vehicular infrastructure now doubles as a civic infrastructure. And so we took, and additionally, when we were performing this urban analysis, we were also thinking about the future of the lack of occupancy level in a place like downtown Los Angeles, especially in the commercial spaces, where whereas a healthy city would have been something like an 80% occupancy level of people who would rent spaces, we're probably going to be looking at a really dramatic drop, which is already happening, in some cases all the way down to 50% occupancy level. And what is that, solid void relationship, and how can we rethink a skyline where, maybe half the population would not show up to work anymore? And so these are some of the things that we're thinking about, but using something that feels like cartoon to relook at the world that we already live in. And I believe that is the function of, every speculative project that feels like utopia has ever done. I'll go on to tell a few stories and, use architectural proposals to accompany them. Here, you're looking at a story where 3 kids are graduating from kindergarten, and they're talking to each other about what they want to do when they grow up. For example, typical things like firefighters or astronauts or, athletes, and they talk about, the kinds of houses they might want to live in. And when they realize that, I guess, farewell is upon them and they're about to part ways with each other, this is when they began to imagine, all the futures that they thought of as one aggregative house, one giant aggregative house that contains all of their workplaces and all of their future homes. And this became a really important source material as we proposed several hypothetical towers for an exhibition that we did at SFMOMA. But instead of simply aggregating, program, let's say, we were also thinking about our relationship with history, and whereas there was always a sense of discomfort in enjoying pop culture and, relating pop culture to the way we design, we're allowing pop culture to be a part of our thinking. The relationship between, let's say, high art and pop art, where high culture and pop culture suddenly flattened for us. We no longer felt the sense of discomfort when we, aggregate not just form, but, the historical sources that continue to influence us. Another story that, became a great jumping point for some design projects is this story about a tall building. I'll go on and tell the story. So here you can see a person who's leaving his house and leaving a domestic partner behind to get into a transit system and meeting a person with a lab coat. And as they ride this elevator, during this very long elevator ride, they started talking about tall buildings. And they started talking about Burj Khalifa. When it was completed at 800 meters, it was the tallest building in the world at the time. And people were asking, how high can we go? How high can we go? Where would it be? And what would it look like? And in this world, the question of how high can we go is answered by when we run out of air, which is roughly 12 kilometers. So here you can faintly make out the skyline of Manhattan, because this tower at 12 kilometers is the extrusion of Central Park in Manhattan. Central Park, extruded for 12 kilometers, has roughly the capacity for something like 87 million people, which is roughly the size of Germany. And which means that, no longer are we talking about a building or a city inside of a building. This is an economic and political state inside of a building. And if it reverses the figure ground condition of Manhattan, it forces zoning to be thought of in section, as well as housing typologies to be thought of in section in order to respond to cloud conditions. So when the protagonist gets to the top of the building, it is revealed to him that for the lab coat person and other researchers, it is physically impossible for humans to live about this point. And so he's the experiment. Stay here for a year. If he survives, they will continue to build higher. And so this was a story in thinking about, I guess, our relationship with density. And I at the time, hyperbolically, wanted to think about how far we can push this question of density. But as I dwell into this world a bit more, I drew a sequel, I guess, for the person to come home. When he came home, they were talking about all the letters he wrote for his domestic partner, all the letters that he wrote every day of the week, for the entire year. And some of the letters were horrendous because there were horrible things on his mind. And she asked him what's gotten into him. He said that during his year of solitude, something important dawned upon him, which is he wanted to be exceptional at what he loved. So he's got strategies in his head and geometries in his heart. And in order to do this, he came up with this idea called the obsession accelerator, where he would build a box within a box, a house within a house, and he would spend day and night doing the thing that he wants to do and become better at it. Which, you know, is a heartbreaking story because this type of story does not have a space for a personal life. But then the space within the space, I guess, you know, became space within the space. This was, I guess, my obsession accelerator back in 2009. After the financial crisis, there was not much to do, and I built this house inside of a house. This was a warehouse space in Chicago, and when this thing was completed, this project is titled Briefcase House. And when this thing was completed, and you can also see the beginnings of Bureau Spectacular in front of the Briefcase House. You know, whereas we now work from home, I was living at work. I had lived at work for something like 6 years before moving on. And this was Helvetica, my cat, who sadly passed away. When this project was completed, I was asking myself, is this architecture? And the question was never really a simple yes or no. Generally no, because, you know, this is too small to be architecture, but too big to be furniture. And so, you know, at the time I started calling this thing super furniture. The idea of super furniture, you know, going back to the urban analysis project that we did for the Downtown LA group, we started looking at the city as a city full of buildings that contained little buildings, for instance. But the buildings that contain buildings also became a design strategy for us to think about, you know, maybe other programs. This, for example, was a retail store that we designed in LA, which was also super furniture, or this, I guess, urban treehouse, you know, for some type of a startup situation, was also a building within a building. We had to continue, I mean, this was at the beginning of the pandemic. We had continued to design these kinds of buildings within buildings for other scenarios. This is not going to come to fruition, unfortunately. You know, the urban analysis project that we did, you know, once again, taking a journalistic approach allowed us to think about the specificities of, you know, redrawing reality, right? Like here, we did not come up with any design. We simply redrew what we saw, edited out some of the things that couldn't be a part of the argument, and highlighted some of the focus from which we can see the city. For instance, you know, in this case, we in this model, we did not really do anything to the buildings except for decapitating the tops of the buildings. And if we were to say that the tops of the buildings with the rooftop bars and the roof gardens and the roof pools, there's a kind of economic disparity between the people who can afford this type of privacy. What does that say about, you know, the city as a fleet of floating antisocial spaceships that detach themselves from the ground? Speaking of spaceships, there was also a kind of obsession about spaceships in my earlier work. You know, for example, there's this story about a person who, I guess, space warped and returned to Earth, you know, having lapsed 10,000 years only to meet a future creature who's a future archaeologist, and, you know, asking questions to a person from the past, was architecture this or that? Because according to the academic findings, architecture was something like this. But in field research, I guess, field archaeology, architecture was that, you know. But this question of was architecture this or that, or our relationship with time, our relationship with archaeology, always lead me back to the 1968 film Planet of the Apes, where the Statue of Liberty's relationship with the ground is partially submerged in order to reveal to Charlton Heston that time has elapsed, a vast amount of time has elapsed. When we did, I think, so Space Popular also were involved in this project. They had a separate, their installation is just somewhere behind this, not in this photograph. But the question of relationship with time, we're very fortunate to have been invited by the Museum of Modern Contemporary Art in South Korea to propose, an installation project. I was suggesting that let's construct a platform where we can reach the datum that would likely be something like 4,000 years in the future. So what does that mean? When we found the Roman Forum, I guess it was something like 6 meters underground after 2,000 years. Every year, a few, I guess, millimeters or centimeters of layers, sediments gets collected over our abandoned cities and places and buildings. And only when we look back, we realize that how much time has gone by. And so I was suggesting that, if we were to construct a platform of something like 6 meters above ground, we would be looking at the year 2019 as the reflection point of a past and a future. To excavate the ground is to excavate history, but to excavate the future would be to excavate air. So I was proposing that we can stand on the surface level of 2,000 years, 4,000 years from now. The spaceship obsession, even led to discussions about, gravity, orientation, plans, questions of plans and sections. Questions of perspectives, which I will get to in just a moment. Because inside of a spaceship without gravity, we get to ask such a question, is an interesting plan and an uninteresting figure if it were to be simply extruded, vice versa, it is an interesting section, sort of a useless plan when simply extruded. And so this question of plan, section, reorientation, rotation, and so forth, led to, this was my first built work, all the way back many years ago, where we basically built a giant clock. This thing rotated once an hour. A plan would become an interior elevation, and interior elevation becomes a reflected ceiling plan. Meaning a wall becomes a ceiling, becomes a floor. And as it rotated at once an hour, the idea of 15 minutes became, every 15 minutes, one of the surfaces became plan, and one of the surfaces became elevation. And what that also meant was every 7.5 minutes, we get to truly experience life on the oblique. Life on the oblique is suggested by Paul Virilio and Claude Perrant. And so, but, there were many stories I produced over time. A murder mystery, for example, that somehow led to a bunch of furniture design, including carpets, or, other stories that led to be thinking about character, shapes, and sensibilities of scale figures. And if we study the kind of like dynamic dance postures of important scale figures, can we learn something about whether or not architecture can have character, And this is the part where it's no longer necessarily architecture, cartoons about architecture. It's using cartoonish architecture to think about, structural issues, such as, if we know what contrapposto does, which contrapposto gives us a relaxed figure, could that become a structural issue where we have to think about columns that are never 90 degrees. I will, as promised, now enter the last two segments. This first, I will say something about where my mind is at when it comes to our relationship with video games, and the notion that architecture is a multimedia practice. And finally, I'll tell one short story and we'll end there. So this is a scene from Cornell University in 2019. 2019, December 2019, right before, I mean, this was the final cycle of a normal architecture review where you can normally sit together with no distance, no masks, no weird people on Zoom cameras, and you get to stand in front of a model and deliver your project. So this student here stands in front of literally this is a Milstein Hall designed by OMA, and this is actually the stage area, right? Now let's stop here and think about this for a moment. What kind of a discipline, what kind of a university discipline does not have a final exam? Ours does not have a final exam. In place of a final exam, instead of it, we have deliverances of soliloquies. These are theatrical deliveries of soliloquies. And the student here is telling a fictional story about a fictional building that she designed. And instead of using, I guess, props of the theater, her puppet in her puppet theater is the architectural model at 1 to 100. And instead of I guess, group of audience, you have, I guess, special audience members who are invited, sometimes with money and sometimes, for favors, to sit in front of this puppet and stare at it and talk about this fiction, which is so insane when you think about it, because this is taken seriously as an academic discipline. No exams, once again. And sometimes when you do this, it's a theater in the round where the protagonist of the actors aren't necessarily the students who present, but then the critics who take it over and turn this into, I guess, a political debate amongst the audience members. Again, a theater in the round. I guess once the world changed in 2020, especially, starting 2019, but 2020, where we're now beginning to become accustomed to the Zoom space, it really begs the question, okay, fine. We're not just making drawings, 2D drawings like plan sections. We're not just making perspectives. We're not just making movies. We're sometimes even making interactive spaces. In this case, this is the Cooper Union year-end show. It was an interactive space where you can navigate the interior of, Cooper Union, redrawn verbatim, 1-to-1. As though a magical realism happened, where the 1-to-1 map of the world matched the 1-to-1 mind map, cognitive map of the world, and they now collapse every form of representation into a digital space and a space where you can walk through. Yves Alambois, the architectural historian who teaches at Princeton University, once argued about the relationship between perspectives and axonometric drawings, both of which are three-dimensional drawings, one of which involved a subject, namely the perspective. The very moment that you have something like a perspective, what happens is you heavily imply the presence of somebody looking, the eyeballs of somebody who's looking, right? Meaning there's the notion of the self is present in the perspectival drawing, and the notion of, I guess, objectivity is suddenly out the window, because we're not talking about an objectively measurable quantitative environment. We're talking about a subjective, sensorial, qualitative environment. And that is the function of the perspective as opposed to the axonometric or the isometric. The game space, or this type of virtual space, takes that question of the perspective one step further by introducing the element of choice. We are real-time reconstructing the perspectival drawing in this instance, because literally the notion of the self is now behind a driver's wheel. And this idea of, the self walking around, looking around, and, the notion of the self being in the space is, I think, representationally deserves a really, I guess, deep conversation about where we are and where we will be in the world of, I guess, our version of the final exam, our version of the final performance. All right, ending as I promised with one story. This is a story about One Wilshire, which is a building in downtown Los Angeles. If you're familiar with this building, you would know that despite the fact that it looks like an office building, contained within it is no longer an office building. It's very much a server farm at this point. What happened is that, I guess, whereas, paperwork with data used to be processed by office worker humans stacked onto, floor plates, the stacks of paper being processed by humans who are stacked on floor plates are now replaced by the data processed by non-humans. So this is at this point all but a husk that looks like an office building, a data center. But One Wilshire is a building that's inside of the skyline of downtown Los Angeles, which the skyline is inside of this window. And this window is inside of a room. And this room is, in fact, an architectural model, which is inside of a photo shoot, which is inside of somebody's computer, which is inside of somebody's office space, which the office space is a set of files inside of a server, which is inside of a server farm, which is inside of One Wilshire. And that marks the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
That was great. I personally have read your book, Citizens of No Place, when I was doing my master's, and I was really, really inspired by your work. Thank you so much. I think we have about 2 questions. One is from Anuj. How hard did you have to work to get to this point where you are creating such visionary projects?
How hard? Hard. Maximum effort. But no, just lots of, I don't know, just like everybody else, I guess, lots of work.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your studio. How big is it? What are the different kind of people there, and what kind of roles do they play?
At this point, right this minute, I would say maybe you could say 1 or you could say 3. It just kind of at this point fluctuates. It fluctuates also by the Venn diagram of projects. We are currently working on a residential project where 3 people are involved in the design process. But I'm also right now working on some, I guess, speculative, I guess, urban analysis projects where it's really just me. And so it really depends on the time. Over the years, I've been very lucky to have had amazing collaborators.
Mm-hmm.
One way of thinking about what's happened with Bureau Spectacular is that it's always felt a lot like a band, but the drummer keeps leaving, if that makes sense.
That's great. The other question we have is from someone called Anonymous Atelier. I've read the 3D series, noticed how collaboration is a very important aspect of your work. How has this experience of collaboration been?
It's been, oh, yikes. It's been really amazing. Like I said, I've had the great fortune of working with I would say at this point, hundreds of people over the last 12 years. And, every season, I mean, right now I'm at a point where I don't really want to take on more than I can chew, if that makes sense. I just want to focus on the 1 or 2 things that I can hopefully do well. But there were times when, I just thought, yeah, it was, but collaboration is so important. I mean, I think no one's really that, I mean, all of us have 24 hours in a day. All of us have 365 days to the year. And, you know, I think everyone gets really good at something, and, you know, you can always work with someone else who's just better at something that you're not. And I think that's one of the things I've learned and really valued, you know. I trust the people who are good and work with, look for people that would be really fun to work with, where you can mutually learn something.
Last question.
Oh, you're mute, by the way.
No, I'm not.
Or your audio is not working either way. Not sure.
Can you hear me?
No, can't hear you.
We can hear you, Anokhi. I'm not sure why Jimenez can't.
Okay. Can you hear me now, Jimenez?
Could you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Can't hear. I mean, I don't know if it's me. I can't hear anything.
Give us 1 second. I think it's
the
his,
anime question. Should I address the anime question?
No.
No. Oh, from my end. Okay. Okay. What about now? Okay, I can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you now. Yeah. Okay. Great.
I think the last question I wanted to ask you is, what kind of video games are you currently playing, or you like playing, and what are you reading these days?
Okay, great. I am currently reading a book titled "They Can't Kill You Until They Kill You." I haven't gotten that far yet, but I'm really enjoying it. This was a recommendation from Timotheus Vermeulen, a Dutch philosopher who, you know, just is someone I really admire. Video game, I don't know. I feel kind of bad about this because it's a little embarrassing. I've never moved on from Age of Empires 2. It's a like what 20-year-old game. I've never moved on from it. And I don't play it. At this point, I just watch it. You know, sometimes, I mean, there are these, it's still a very active forum. I guess, you know, at the beginning of my architectural education, it's an axonometric environment. And, you know, this as a strategy game, axonometric environment where you construct stuff, destroy stuff. I just, you know, was always really drawn to it. And I think these kinds of, maybe I can say something about this a bit more intelligently as opposed to a nostalgia game, because I think what I've never really gotten into is the first-person shooter game, but I've also always been really interested in open world, I guess, typologies. In some ways, a game like Age of Empires 2, you know, which you can name a bunch of other games that are similar to it, and even now it's still being developed as an axonometric environment. There's not one way of playing it, I guess, whereas, you know, something like the first-person shooter game, there's almost a script that's written that you play through or follow through. The open-endedness of writing your own story, there's something about that with a game like AoE 2 or open world platforms that I find a lot more interesting or liberating. And I think that's maybe where, you know, possibly why, I mean, I can't speak for all designers, but as a designer, that may be why I'm more drawn to games like that.
Sounds great. Okay, that's all for now.
All right. Okay.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Really enjoyed your presentation.